Hi, my name is Deb Rich, archivist for the town of Sandwich. The Friends of the Sandwich Town Archives would like to welcome you to Tell Me a Story, where we will be interviewing distinguished Sandwich citizens for a view of the past. History can be defined as the branch of knowledge that records and analyzes past events. History provides a long-range perspective with which to perceive and interpret the present. Author Michael Crichton once said, "If you don't know history, then you don't know anything. You are a leaf that doesn't know it's part of a tree." History comes alive when somebody is able not only to read about the past, but also visit the places, examine the artifacts, view the images, and listen to the actual words, which is what we'll be doing here today. For most people, history starts with simply learning about their family or their community. After all, history plays a vital role in our everyday lives. We learn from our past in order to achieve greater influence over our future. History serves as a model not only for who we are, but what we could be, what we learn to champion, and what we avoid. Every decision made around the world is based upon what came before us. Archives and libraries serve to preserve our heritage and our culture. They offer a window to the past, the foundation on which we build our future. The Friends of the Sandwich Town Archives are committed to protecting and celebrating who we are as individuals and as a community. So I'd like to introduce you today to Barbara Gill, my predecessor, former town archivist at the Sandwich Town Archives. Barbara, it's a pleasure to see you today.
Well, I'm glad to have you here.
Thank you. We've been working very closely together, and Barbara is invaluable when it comes to information about the town of Sandwich and its citizens. So I'm going to ask you a few questions about your past and how living in Sandwich has affected or influenced your life. First question of the day. You were born in Sandwich, is that correct?
Yes.
Which street and house did you grow up in?
Well, I was born in Forestdale, and I was born in 1932, and my parents lost the house. It was Depression times, and they moved down to East Sandwich, where I lived when I started school, and for the rest of my years have been in East Sandwich.
Very good. And how many siblings did you have? How big was the family? You were only child.
Yeah,
that's wonderful.
Only child. Yeah.
Now, what about your neighbors in East Sandwich? Did you live around people or names that we would recognize?
I had a couple perhaps in Forestdale that it's my first childhood memory. I can remember going down the little bank that was next to our house and visiting a classmate. We weren't in school yet, but he ended up being a classmate. His name was Barbara Gill, and unfortunately, he froze to death.
Ooh.
He was coming home from the local little store with his sister, and his sister came into the house, and he didn't follow her, and he got out into it was just woods then all around those houses, and he got out there and he found a building that was on the electric line, the high line that went out, and he went into that, and they found him there.
Oh my, that's so sad.
We were in the third grade then.
I was just going to ask, how old was he at the time? And his sister, this must have been a terrible tragedy for the whole family. Yeah,
it really was. They left town shortly after that, I think. Well, actually, his father was killed in a fire in a large forest fire, and after that, his mother and the daughter left town.
Sure, understandably. Very hard.
Yeah. Then we moved to East Sandwich.
Then you moved to East Sandwich.
Right.
And did you have neighbors there?
Yes, we did have neighbors. We were on 6A. We were right next to the hallways. And then there wasn't anybody else on that side of the road until you got down quite a ways on 6A. But it was right next, just the hallway house was on the corner of Plowed Neck Road and 6A. So I had a friend, George Elvander, and all of his family grew up down on Plowed Neck Road, which we called Beach Road then, because it was the road to the beach.
That makes sense.
And we were together quite often through the years. And then eventually we moved down 6A, just below Scorton Creek, to a house which was on the, my father rented from, let's see, Mr. Smith. And that was where the Riverview School is now. That house eventually burned down. So there aren't many of the houses left that I actually lived in. The house that we lived in next to hallways was a hallway house, and they tore that down. And somebody from, I think from Marston's Mills, bought it.
It seems like you had a lot of young gentlemen playmates at that time. Were you considered a tomboy, or did you like to do
Well, you had
sports?
to be whatever. I was it. I mean, I didn't have any girlfriends down there. As I got older and could ride my bike, I would go over and visit with Lois Armstrong, who lived on Old County Road. And by that time, I was, of course, going to school on the bus, so you met a lot of friends. But I was pretty much a loner.
Yeah. Well, obviously you read a lot of
My
books.
mother was a bird lover, so we went out and did a lot of bird watching.
Yes.
And Dad was a fisherman, so I went to the beach with him when he was fishing. And
yeah, I was just about to ask you about your parents. So your dad was a fisherman? Was he a commercial fisherman, or?
no, actually he was a painter and paper hanger.
Oh.
And part-time carpenter. But he did put out lobster pots. He had a little dory of his own, and he did a lot of fishing. Of course, this was still Depression times. So he would go fishing, and he would, the bass, and sell them at the local fishman up in Sagamore. He did a lot of hunting. So unlike the people in the cities, we didn't have as hard a time because we had a garden. Mother canned. We went and picked blueberries in season, and she canned those, so you had nice, fresh dessert.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
Well, just as an aside memory, what was your favorite meal to have when you were a little girl?
Oh my!
If you could choose any meal that you loved, which one would it be?
Probably clam chowder.
Clam chowder.
That was another thing. We went down when the flats were out along Scorton Beach. We went down and Dad got clams, and Mother could can those also, which we could have clam chowder anytime you wanted.
Ooh, very nice. Now I'm hungry. When you got old enough, maybe a little bit older, did you have chores or responsibilities, or did you get a job when you were fairly young?
Of course, I helped around the house. We had chickens, and we went out and fed the chickens, and Dad raised a pig every year, so I remember one pig named Katrinka.
Katrinka the
Yeah,
pig.
we'd go out and feed her. When I was in junior high, I believe, I started cleaning house for a local family, the Suttons, and I did babysitting.
Yes. Cleaning house seems like hard work for a young girl, though.
And it was an old house. I think that's why I got to love old houses, because it was just...
You appreciated the work.
Yeah, right.
The quality.
Yeah.
Very good. Did you go to the Henry T. Wing School?
There wasn't any other one.
There wasn't
Yes.
any other one.
Yep.
So tell me,
All of 12 grades.
all 12 grades.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about school time memories? What particularly stands out? Were there dances? There probably weren't that many students.
No, just like when we had our junior prom, everybody came. You know, it wasn't just juniors. If it had been the juniors, there would have been 30 people there, the 15 of us and their dates.
Yes.
You know, so we just had 15 in our class.
Wow.
Sometimes through the years there had been more, but by the time we graduated, there were 15.
Very nice. How would you describe yourself as a teenager?
I
You must have
guess
been
I was a
studious.
nerd.
A nerd. I love it.
Yeah, when we made our yearbook, we didn't have money to have a commercial yearbook, so we'd made the photographs, and then we did it photographically. We didn't have computers, so you couldn't print it out on a computer. So we made all the pages for the yearbook and put it together.
Wow. Do you still have it?
No, somewhere in moving from house to house, it disappeared.
Oh.
But there were a couple of my classmates that do have them, so
Yeah.
we could get a copy if we really wanted one.
That would be fun.
Yeah.
We'll throw some pictures in with the
Right.
video. Tell me about what happened after school. Did you
After school,
did you go to
I
college?
went to college.
Yep.
I didn't move out of the state. I went all the way up to Boston, to the big city, and I went to Simmons. I had been accepted at William and Mary in Virginia, but they couldn't fit me into housing, and I
Ooh.
would have had to live outside, and folks just couldn't swing that.
Yeah, yeah. A little too expensive.
Yeah, as it was, he went to what he called beneficial finance. To support some, and I had scholarships and so forth.
Well, of
so-
course.
Yeah.
You were a smart nerd.
Yeah, right.
And what did you like about Simmons? What the subjects attracted you most?
I was in the sciences, biology and chemistry. In my senior year, I was a double major in organic chemistry and biology.
There is no stopping this woman.
No.
Good for you. Getting back to Sandwich a little bit, could you tell us a childhood event, a big event that happened in town that you remember as being a big deal?
I remember, the 1939 celebration of the anniversary of town.
Which anniversary was that? That was the
39 would be the 200.
200, so 250th?
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Okay.
And one of my classmates was in the women's club. It wasn't a float. They had hired a carriage from somewhere, and she was in there with her grandmother. And so it's one of those things that sticks in your memory.
Oh, for sure. You didn't get to ride in the carriage?
No, I didn't
You
ride in the carriage. Yeah.
Saw your friend did that.
Yeah.
Sounds very fancy, though. Very
Yeah.
nice.
And that was when they started having the, it was, the boat parade was very fancy that year. And of course they had fireworks over on Cemetery Point.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still having those boat parades every year now with
Isn't
the
that wonderful?
lanterns. Yeah, and those started much earlier than that.
Yes,
But,
yeah. I remember seeing photographs. Just recently, some photographs came across the desk of a boat parade in the mid-'70s, 1970s.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, it's quite fun to remember, to know that tradition goes back
Right. It goes back
pretty far.
into the late 1800s.
Yeah. Tell us about the businesses in town that you remember, industries in Sandwich that were particularly memorable to you for any reason.
Well, there weren't a whole lot of industries left by the time I was in high school and growing up. You remember the local markets that you went to.
Right.
I went to what's Russell's Corner now. It was Russell's Market then.
Ooh.
And that's where Dad bought any of the meat and so forth. And he had a special cut. He liked an H-bone roast.
Oh, I haven't heard of that. Tell
No.
me about an H-bone.
No, it has a large bone in it. I don't know if that's big, but anyway, it's from the hip area, I guess. And it was called an H-bone.
Must have had good flavor, though.
Right, yeah. Speaking of meat, when rationing came in, my father at that point was a caretaker for the firing range, which was down in what is now Carlton Shores. And they came down from Camp Edwards to fire at radio-controlled airplanes that went by. And they would run them. And so it was rationing times. And my mother had this, we lived in what was a dispensary, and it had this giant stove in it, cast iron stove. And Mother always had a pot of coffee on there for any of the soldiers that came down and wanted to have coffee. So we ended up getting butter and things
nice.
from the men who brought
Grateful soldiers who
grateful soldiers.
needed that cup of
Right,
coffee.
yeah.
That's wonderful. Your mom was pretty smart.
Mother, too, worked in the cafeteria at the high school, the whole school,
Yeah.
the wing school. And she rode on the bus to school with us,
Oh, no.
along with two of our teachers. They picked up Mrs. Snow, who lived on Old County Road, and Mrs. Freeman, who lived further up 6A.
Huh.
So, and all of the children went on.
Wow.
Kids didn't have cars then,
No.
so it was the whole.
And I bet they were well behaved to the teachers on.
Yeah, you could fit everybody that came from East Sandwich on one bus.
Wow. That's fantastic. Tell me a little bit about your specific genealogy, Barbara. Do you know when your first ancestors settled Sandwich, and
Yeah.
what do you know about him or her and why they came here?
Well, it was. My mother was a fish, so I'll just give you the fishes.
Okay.
Nathaniel Fish came here and settled here in Sandwich, along with the 10 men of Saugus who came down. He was one of the group of 50 or so families that came and here. Don't know who his wife was. I'm descended through the second generation, and I'm not really sure, but for a long time we thought it was a second Nathaniel, but it turns out that it was Jonathan, and we don't know who his wife is either. So it's kind of tenuous, and I can get back very specifically to the third generation, which would be a Nathaniel, and he married an Ellis. So that you get to be related to a lot of people in town.
Right. Right.
And probably or at least I know by the fifth generation, they were living up in Forestdale. The earliest Nathaniel had a place in town which was right next to the First Parish Church. And the town took that land from him and gave him some land down near what they called Sea Pit Neck, or Saw Pit Neck, which I think was in Spring Hill. I don't have an exact location for it, but anyway. And then after the fifth generation, we all lived up in Forestdale.
Very interesting.
And there was a lot of intermarriage in the family,
Right,
I must admit. Everybody's got 4 grandparents. Well, 3 in one of the generations had the surname Fish.
Right. Wow, fascinating.
Right.
Yeah. Well, there were only a limited number of people, so.
Exactly. They did marry people from Falmouth, but one of them was a Fish, come to think of it. You know.
Let me just check my notes here.
Okay.
Well, yeah, you still have family here in town, do you not? Or,
Yes.
I mean, certainly your children are here. And
Yes.
tell
yeah.
me a little bit about the surviving Fishes and or Gills.
Yeah, well, that's sort of a family joke. My mother was a Fish. My father was a Finn. He was first generation from Finland.
Oh,
Got some new genes in the pool. So it's, and then of course I married Clyde, and he's Gill.
yep.
And I have a granddaughter who married a Fry, and they've got 2 small Fry.
I love that story. Now tell me about your dad. You didn't mention much about. Is he a direct immigrant from Finland, or his parents came over?
His parents came over from Finland. His father worked for J.H. Foster, who built the masthead.
Yes.
And lived in it. And I think my grandfather helped on some of the work. He was very talented. I know there's a story where somebody came along and they broke the axle in their car. And he somehow welded it together with a dime. Now, I don't understand how that worked, but apparently it did.
Wow.
And Dad eventually, after he worked at the firing range, he went to work for the state of Massachusetts at the game farm in East Sandwich. And he has worked in the area where the pheasants were raised. And he had always been a hunter. But he never, well, he went deer hunting every year after he got there. But they had a pet deer. And he somehow didn't come back with a deer after that anymore. It was just...
Oh, isn't that nice?
Yeah.
That's kind of like a Bambi story.
Right, yeah. Yeah. It was so funny. He was a smoker, and the deer would come up and pull his cigarette package out. She liked
to eat them?
Yeah, liked cigarettes.
That's a whole different kind of Bambi story.
Yes, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the technology that was around when you were a child. I mean, do you remember? I remember personally getting my first color television and being
remember the
amazed
first television.
that. So
Period.
you remember the first television? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it was interesting. My father sort of hogged the TV, and the things that were on were things that he was interested in. He watched bowling every week when it came on, and so forth, and the news, and some of the stories that came on. But had radio.
Did you get a turn at the television?
Oh, yes, yeah. But they didn't have the number of channels you watch now.
Well, of course
you
not.
had maybe 3 main channels, and that was it.
What was your favorite show?
Oh, I don't know. I really don't know.
How about on the radio? Is there a favorite show on the radio?
I listened to the opera.
The opera.
Every year, every weekend that came on.
Oh, that's lovely.
That and the Shadow Knows. And
we like that too.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, are you an opera fan now, or because of that? Have you seen an opera?
Oh, yes, yeah. When we were in high school, we went up to Carmen.
Oh, wonderful.
And of course, we were all taking French then because it was the only other language than English that was given in the school. So we read the libretto all in French and understood what was going on more than we probably wouldn't have.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like a lovely field trip.
Right, yeah.
How about pets? Did you have any pets growing up besides Katrinka and the chickens?
Dad always had a hunting dog, usually a beagle or a foxhound. And there were generally cats around. After we were married, my mother had a pet lamb and a pet fox.
Wow.
And a pet crow.
Wow. Not your usual domestic animal.
No. But Dad brought the kit fox home. It had been abandoned by or her mother had been killed or something, and so he brought it home, and she raised it.
Wow. Did it behave?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Came in the house with him.
Wow. That's fun. That's a fun story. And the crow. I hear they're very intelligent.
Oh, yes. It particularly didn't like my aunt.
Ooh.
I don't know why. But we had a porch roof, and it would get up on the porch roof, and as soon as she got out of the car, he would dive bomb it.
Oh, my goodness. That's frightening. Those are large animals, large birds. That would frighten me.
Of course, she'd swat it, and then he'd do it more. So,
of course.
This same crow helped my father in the garden. Well, no, went along with my father in the garden. And Dad was planting onion sets. And he turned around and looked behind him, and here was the crow pulling them out one by one after he planted them.
Oh. Mischievous crow.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about specialities in your family. You said you enjoyed clam chowder very much as a recipe, but did anyone have a hobby that they used to make crafts or do something on the side that they'd sell separately? Or
I had an uncle that collected buttons. No, actually, it was my mother's uncle. Had a great big collection of buttons, all mounted on cardboard and so forth.
Wow! And so you couldn't really play with them as a little girl.
No, but I could look at them and say, "That's a pretty button,"
What ended up with that? What happened to that collection? Did it just?
I have no idea.
Oh, wouldn't it be nice to have it again?
He moved to East Falmouth to live with his brother and sister-in-law. And I assume it went, or he sold it for.
Right.
Yeah.
Was there a particular button that you loved that you just sort of like?
No, it's just they were fancy. They were the buttons that they had in the late 1800s. Lots of cut jet stones and medallions made from ceramics that were painted and so forth.
Wow, lovely.
Yeah.
How about yourself? Do you have any hobbies or collections of any?
Pretty much genealogy.
Well, I know that.
Yeah.
You've left that collection to me, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, I've got a few folders over there. I'm now at the moment thinking, well, it's going to be 400 years since the Mayflower came.
Wow.
So I'm going to try to get together a collection of stories or information about my grandchildren and great-grandchildren's Mayflower ancestors.
Oh, that's a wonderful thing. Yeah. Excellent. I also know that you at one point collected postcards, though.
Oh, yes.
Tell me about that.
The postcards were another of my mother's aunts, Aunt Zuli. And she and her husband had a little grocery store on Liberty Street. Mm-hmm. And her mother was the one that had started the collection from a sister who lived up in Boston, and they corresponded on postcards, and it built up into quite a large collection.
Mm-hmm.
And when Aunt Julie died, they gave the collection to me because I was just interested in them.
Of course, yeah, the history behind them and the
Right.
and the
Yeah.
wonderful detailing on each one.
Yeah.
In fact, Mr. John Paradise from the Sandwich Enterprise has asked us to scan some of the cards with your permission,
Yeah.
and they're going to publish them in the paper as a interesting,
Right. Yeah.
image for the paper
Yeah.
every upcoming holiday or month. Or
Right. I have a whole collection of cards that a lot of them were sent to my, I guess she would be my cousin Doris, Aunt Julie's daughter, for various holidays, starting with New Year's and going all the way through the year.
Yeah, isn't that a wonderful thing that people used to send postcards or cards on
Right.
holiday
Yeah.
events?
Yeah.
I mean, we just, even now today at Christmas, you get an email from someone.
Right.
It's a lost art, the art of postcard and letter writing. Did you, as a child, play any pranks on anybody? Did you
There weren't many people around to play
pranks on?
other than my father. He had a very dry wit and did tend to play pranks on people. One of our neighbors had set up an ice fishing set on one of the little entrances to Squirton Harbor. And my dad somehow got a hold of a flying fish. He found a preserved fish that he came on shore in a bottle.
Wow.
And so he immediately went and put it on Alton Garland's hook. And he figured he'd caught a flying fish. And
That's a good one.
right, yeah.
What, if any, local events, like besides the anniversary that you remember, are there any political events that happened or a change in Sandwich buildings or history that you were particularly impacted by?
We lived in the boondocks. We weren't really
Yeah.
impacted by what was going on in the center of town.
But more recently, your love
Yeah.
of history, you must,
Oh yeah.
be concerned about some of the repurposing of some of the historical buildings in town.
Well, it's a two-way street. Even if they're repurposed, they're preserved, so that you get, one of the churches is turned into a residence, and it's hard to say whether you're against it or for it.
Yep. Yep, depending on the outcome, which you don't know at the time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I feel sorry for the people who live on the beaches, knowing that Mother Nature is going to do what she's going to do, and they're just the cutoff of the sand coming down from peaked cliffs is just going to keep eating away at Sandwich beaches.
Yeah. Yep, it's a reality we have to live with this day and age.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your work at the archives. Is there any particular historical event or news article or something that you came across that you just, it was like finding treasure that you were very excited about?
I guess it's just the total mass of information that is there. The old newspapers, I culled those for all sorts of things, little things that didn't make much difference perhaps at the time, but really affected the town. like when they put the Mid-Cape Highway through, they said Sandwich is going to be ignored forever. Well, that's good and that's bad, because we didn't change as much as some of the other towns,
Mm-hmm.
and we still have our historic character
Mm-hmm.
that is going to be important. And then, of course, when it was in the 1930s, no, well, actually it was in 1930, that the state improved 6.
Mm-hmm.
And it came through and came down over Wilson's Hill, and we had our first traffic light.
Ooh.
Yeah. Actually, the road went through for a while before they finally petitioned and said, we need a traffic light there.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Lots of accidents.
People come down over the hill and
they're going too fast.
they're going too fast, but it made a difference to the center of town.
Right.
Main Street had been the previous route that all the traffic that came down from Plymouth or Boston or anywhere went down Main Street.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can imagine, if it's a crowd on 6A going back now,
Yes.
it was just, it must have been bumper to bumper when they finally started having cars and coming down.
Wow. Yes.
Everybody built tea rooms along the way, and the
Yep.
gas stations went up.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
actually, the Daniel Webster had a gas station of its own. They had a pump there.
isn't that
for
interesting?
their,
I did not know that.
Yeah, for their people who came to stay at.
Wow, that's
At the inn.
fascinating. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the Sandwich Public Library. As a librarian and an archivist, I want to get your perspective. We're going to possibly do a tie-in with our interviews for your memories of the library. Did you visit the library when you were a child? It may not have been there.
Oh, yes. Oh, no, it was there.
Okay.
I'm old enough so I could be there.
And then I'm going to ask you what your favorite book of all time is and why.
Oh.
Tell me a little bit about the library first. You used to go.
Okay, the library that I went to was what is now the children's room.
Mm-hmm.
That was it.
Mm-hmm.
So that had all the adult collection, and we had a small collection where the children's books were. I can remember reading a book about a turtle. And it had, the cover had pictures of a turtle eating raspberries. You remember strange things, but that's what I remember.
Well, that's a wonderful memory. And in fact, the library is currently housing turtles for release in the wild. They just came in. Yeah. So that's a wonderful, almost a serendipitous wrap-up for us. So tell me about your favorite book. I mean, you must have read, being a nerd, you must have read many, many books over the years, but is there any book that was particularly meaningful to you?
I did read a lot. I read a lot of science fiction.
Science fiction. Ooh, it's my genre. Tell me all about it, Barbara.
Yeah, right. And I was just interested in geography and that sort of thing. Somehow I didn't get the interest in history until later in life.
Later in life, yep. That's okay.
Yeah.
Well, if you start with science fiction, you've got the universe at your fingertips.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. And I was always interested in marine. I had planned to go into marine biology.
That's
if I
right.
went
Tell
to
us a
William
little
and
bit about
Mary.
Woods Hole.
But I did go to work at Woods Hole. I didn't work in marine biology. I was in the geology department and spent my hours counting grains of sand and
Well, at least it's job security.
Yes, right, yeah. But I was there for about 6 years, maybe.
Very good. And then
I was just there long enough to I could retire. And then I had my children, and it was too much of a haul to go back and forth to. And we didn't have daycare, although I had my mother who would.
Right.
But.
And how did you meet Clyde?
In the Daniel Webster. One of my jobs in the kitchen was to make, to grind up things, clams for chowder and so forth, or pickles for tartar sauce. Mm-hmm. And he was the milkman. And he brought the milk in and put it in the cooler. And the meat grinder happened to be right where the door to the cooler was, so he'd go in and then he'd come out and he'd hit me with a door. And
that doesn't sound very romantic.
Strike up a conversation and so forth. And then Mother was working at the cafeteria in the high school, and he came in to deliver the milk, and I happened to be there home from college, and he had something to eat, I imagine, because she usually fed him. And then she asked him if he'd take me down to the Daniel Webster so I could see my friends at work. And it just went on from there.
It blossomed from there.
It blossomed from there. Yeah.
Well, I have to tell you, you guys are one of the most sweetest, most romantic, loving couples I have ever met. And I'm very jealous of your relationship. So thank you very much. Barbara, is there any last thing that you'd like to say? We'll get on with...
I'm not a great talker.
You're a fantastic talker. I don't know. You're doing great.
I was always the quiet one. The quiet nerd. Yeah.
That's okay, too. Well, I'd like to thank you very much
for
sitting for the interview. I heard some wonderful stories, and I think everybody's going to really enjoy watching the interviews and the snippets on cable TV. Thank you for joining us. We hope you learned something that you did not previously know. We hope you were entertained. To learn more, come and visit us at the Town Archives in the Sandwich Public Library. You might discover something about yourself or your own family. And Barbara and I would be happy to help you do just that. Thank you. Bye-bye.